guys, happy Friday. Today's lesson is on writing equations with the variables on both sides. Mrs. Melancon should have already handed out your packet for this particular topic. If you don't have a pencil, there are some on my desk that I also left for her. So hurry and quick, come grab a pencil so that you can follow along in the lesson. Also, make sure that you are not talking during the lesson so that everyone can get their notes written down without distractions. Okay, here we go. Before we start writing equations with the variables on both sides, I want to talk to you about some different words that mean add, subtract, multiply, divide, or equals. Okay, so when you are writing an equation, that means that you need to take the key words from the word problem and you need to figure out what operation you're going to use. And you're also going to need to figure out where your equal sign is going to go. Okay, so these words right here, more than, increased by, sum, gain, altogether, total, in all, combined, those are different ways of just meaning that we need to use addition. Okay, for the next set, less than, decreased by, difference, loss, fewer. These are some different words that mean we're going to use subtraction as our operation. Times, each, per, product, twice. Whenever you see these words, these all mean to multiply. Another word that means to multiply that's not on this list that I would like to add is the word of. Okay, and then for divide, we have quotient, we have shared equally, we have half, and if you have half something, that's the same as dividing by 2, and then split. So these are some different ways to say division. And then these two words right here, is and same, that is going to help us to know where our equal sign needs to go when we write our equation. So I'm going to give you guys just a second to get all of these written down so that you can use them in today's lesson. Okay, now if you didn't get all of these written down, it's okay. I've actually posted this video to Canvas, so you can go to Canvas and click on the link and then you can fill in your chart. Okay, so here we go. Let's do this. Whenever you are doing a word problem, or if you're writing an equation for a word problem, remember the very first thing you want to do is you want to read through the problem and you want to make sure that you really understand the situation. Because if you don't understand the situation, there's no sense in even moving forward. And so I want you to read it and reread it and draw a picture for it or write out a model or really make sure that you understand what's happening. So let's do that first. This says Richard purchased a box of 12 cookies and Megan purchased a bag of 10 cookies. Okay, so picture that in your mind. Just like in English class, when you guys read through a book, your teacher asks you to have a picture in your mind of what's happening. Do that same thing when you are doing a word question in math, okay? So picture Richard with a box of 12 cookies and Megan has a bag of 10. And then it says, Richard ate X number of cookies from his box, while Megan ate half the number of cookies that Richard ate. How many cookies did Richard eat if they have the same number of cookies left over? Okay, so the situation is Richard has some cookies and he eats some cookies. And Megan has less cookies than Richard, and then she also eats some of the cookies. And we want to know, how many cookies did Richard eat? If they have the same number of cookies left over. Okay, so once we know what the question is that we're being asked, that is what our variable is going to be. So our variable is going to be how many cookies Richard ate. Okay, so let's just go ahead and use X for our variable. And let's say that X is going to stand in for the number of cookies that Richard ate? Okay, so that's the thing we're trying to figure out in this situation. We want to know how many cookies Richard ate. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to write an expression to represent Richard, meaning that we're going to write mathematically what they told us about the number of cookies that Richard ate. Okay, so we know Richard started out with 12, and then he ate X number of cookies from his box. So if he's eating cookies, that's going to be a subtraction. So he started off with 12, and he ate a certain number that we don't know. Okay, and then let's go ahead and write an expression to represent Megan. We know that Megan ate half the number of cookies that Richard ate. Okay, so we know that Megan started off with 10, and we know that she ate half of the number of cookies that Richard ate. So the expression for Megan is going to be 10 minus 1/2 times by however many cookies Richard ate. Okay, now the way that we put this together in an equation is we know that we can find out how many cookies Richard ate if they have the same number of cookies left over. Okay, so when it says the same, that's where our equal sign is going to go. So the number of cookies that Richard has left over is 12 minus X. We want to set that equal to the number of cookies that Megan has left over. So the expression for that is 10 minus 1/2 X. Okay, so there's our equation. Now, once you have your equation, you can go ahead and solve it. So remember, when you're solving an equation with the variable on both sides, the first thing that you want to do is you want to get the two terms that have the same variable, you want to get those on the same side. Okay, so we have a negative 1x, we have a negative 1/2 x. Let's go ahead and just add 1x to both sides. So that's going to leave us with 12 equals 10 plus 1/2 times by x. And then from there, we would minus 10. So 2 equals 1/2 times by x. And since this x is getting multiplied by 1/2, to get rid of that multiplication, we're going to have to use division. So we're going to have to take the 2 on the other side, we're going to have to divide it by 1/2, and that will tell us what x is equal to. So in your calculator, you have to put it in just like this. 2 divided by 1/2, which is a 4. Okay, so that means we know that Richard ate 4 cookies. Okay, and then that means we also know that he had 8 cookies left over. And then for Megan, we know that Megan had 1/2 times by the number of cookies that Richard ate, which means she ate 2, which means she also had 8 left over. So you can see that those two are equal to each other. Okay, let's try another one. Nolan set out a beaker containing 2.8 inches of rainwater, which increased by an average of 3.1 inches per day. Tina set out a beaker containing 5.3 inches of rainwater, which increased by an average of 1.7 inches per day. About how many days will the two beakers hold the same amount of rainwater? So let's go back to the situation. Let's make sure we really understand what's happening. So Nolan set out a beaker and it contained 2.8 inches of rainwater. Okay, so this is what was in the beaker when he set it out. And then that increased by an average of 3.1 inches per day. So we started out with 2.8, and then every day that increased by 3.1 inches. Okay, so each day that passed, the beaker continued to get more full and more full of water by 3.1 inches every day. And then Tina set out a beaker containing 5.3 inches of rainwater. So hers started out with a little bit more than Nolan's. And then hers increased by an average of 1.7 inches per day. Okay, so now that we understand the situation, let's figure out what question we're being asked to solve because that's going to be our variable.